How does this
Well,
sound?
you do sound better.
Yeah, that sounds
wait.
like a regular person again.
Yay.
You should
Okay.
have nudged me off the stage, Lost.
Well, I didn't know how it was going to sound.
Okay. Well, good, because Theofi he's quite an active participant in our next in the Roaring Trumpet, at least this part of the story. And Lorelei, stay up here as narrator, and Vidaf Harold Shea is here, and Rocky is Loki, and Muspelspark. No, we had you were originally Skymere, but Muspelspark. Can I ask if you'd be willing to let Rocky do Skymere for this week? Because he did a fabulous job last week, and were you able to hear him?
He was good.
Well, I'm not sure I remember the accent that I used.
It'll come.
Where are we ending tonight?
But it's got to be okay with Muspelspark. I think we're going to the end of the chapter.
Yep. That's okay. That's great.
Is it okay?
Thanks. Oh yeah. It'd be nice to hear what Grocky did.
Yeah, I don't think your computer was operating last week very well. Yeah, I think to the beginning of chapter 6,
Okay,
and then I'm
got it.
hoping time for Vidaf to address Norton Street, because I'm hoping that we can start that next week, because that should be a lot of fun. Okay, so that's right. I should tell you, they just all exited the Giant's glove, and in kind of like shock that finding out that it was actually a glove that they had rested the night in. It was their shelter. So our last paragraph was the implications of this statement were so alarmingly that the 4 travelers picked up their belongings and scrambled out of the shelter with ludicrous haste, the mighty Thor included. So the next paragraph would be the narrator.
The rain had ceased. Ragged serpents of mist, pearly against the darker gray of the clouds, crawled over the hills. Outside, the travelers looked back at their shelter. There was no question that it was an enormous glove. Skrymir grasped the upper edge of the opening with his left hand and thrust the right into the erstwhile dwelling. From where he stood, Shay couldn't see whether the big glove had shrunk to fit or whether it had faded out of sight and been replaced by a similar one. At the same time, he became suddenly conscious of the fact that he was wet to the skin. Before he had a chance to think over the meaning of these facts, Thor was bellowing at him to help him get the chariot loaded. When he was sitting hunched up on the chest and swaying to the movement of the cart, Thialfi murmured to him,
I knew Loki would get around the hairy one. When it's something that calls for smartness, you can depend on Uncle Fox, I always say.
Shay nodded silently and sneezed. He'd be lucky if he didn't come down with a first-class cold riding in these wet garments. The landscape was wilder and bleaker around them than even on the previous day's journey. Ahead, Skrymir tramped along, the bag on his back swaying with his strides, his sour sweat smell wafting back over the chariot. Wet garments. Why? The rain had stopped when they emerged from that monstrous glove. There was something peculiar about the whole business of that glove. The others, including the 2 gods, had unhesitatingly accepted its huge size as an indication that Skrymir was even larger and more powerful than he seemed. He was undoubtedly a giant, but hardly that much of a giant. Shay supposed that although the world he was in did not respond to the natural laws of that form which he had come, there was no reason to conceive that the laws of illusion had changed. He had studied psychology enough to know something of the standard methods used by stage magicians. But others, unfamiliar both with such methods and the technique of modern thought, would not think of criticizing observation with pure logic. For that matter, they would not think of questioning the evidence of observation.
You know, I just wonder whether Loki is as clever as he thinks, and whether Skrymir isn't smarter than he pretends.
The servant of the gods gave him a startled glance.
A mighty strange word is that. Why?
Well, didn't you say that the giants would be fighting against the gods when this big smash comes?
Truly I did. High blows Heimdall, the horn is aloft. The ash shall shake and the rime giants ride on the roads of hell. Leastways, that's what Voluspa says, the words of the prophetess.
Then isn't Skrymir a shade too friendly with someone he's going to fight?
Thjalfi gave a barking laugh.
You don't know much about Okuthor to say that. This Skrymir may be big, but Redbeard has his strength belt on. He could twist that there giant right up. Snip, snap.
Okay. Well, look here. Did you notice that when Skrymir put his gloves on, your clothes got wet all of a sudden?
Why, yes, now that I think of it.
My idea is that there wasn't any giant glove there at all. It was an illusion, a magic to scare us. We really slept in the open without knowing it and got soaked. But whoever magicked us did a good job, so we didn't feel the wet till the spell was off and the big glove disappeared.
I'm sorry, I can barely hear Vida. I'm not sure where he is.
Hello. Hi. How's my voice right now? Can you guys hear me? Should I turn it up?
No, it's good.
It's good
I
here.
hear you fine.
I hear you fine too. Lost, maybe you can turn them up. Maybe you need to turn them up individually.
Okay, I pushed it a little further. It might be that your setting is set to. Never mind. I've noticed sometimes when you're a little distance away from people, you can lose a lot of volume. Wow. Hello. Yeah, I would get closer to me too.
Or zooming in also helps. If you zoom in, it's as if you got closer.
If you have it set configured that way, then your camera setting will change your volume. It depends. There's two settings: one where your avatar is, and the other where your camera setting is. So if you've zoomed way out on your camera, that can make you faint. Okay. Anyway.
Lost, can we hear you? Do you still have sound? Lost,
Type
yes?
something. I'm typing him a message now.
Okay, could we try again?
Here you are.
There, I can hear him now.
All right, I'm going to do my line again. Just the end. But whoever magicked us did a good job, so we didn't feel the wet till the spell was off and the big glove disappeared.
Maybe so, but how does it signify?
It signifies that Skrymir didn't blunder into us by accident. It was a put-up job.
The rustic scratched his head in puzzlement.
Seems to me you're being a mite fancy, friend. Let me give that to you again. Seems to me you're being a little mite fancy, friend Harold. I wish we had Heimdall along. He can see 100 leagues in the dark and hear the wool growing on a sheep's back. But 'twouldn't do to have him and Uncle Fox together. Thor's the only one of the Aesir that can stand Uncle Fox.
Shay shivered.
Say, friend Harold, how would you like to run a few steps to warm up?
Shay soon learned that Thjalfi's idea of warming up did not consist merely of dog-trotting behind the chariot.
We'll race to yonder boulder and back to the chariot. Be ye ready? Get set. Go.
Before Shay fairly got into his stride, his woolens flapping around him, Thialfi was halfway to the boulder, gravel flying under his shoes, the clothes fluttering stiffly behind him like a flag in a gale. Shay had not covered half the distance when Thialfi passed him, grinning on the way back. He had always considered himself a good runner, but against this human antelope it was no contest. Wasn't there anything in the world he could do to hold his own against these people? Thialfi helped him pull him over the tail of the chariot.
You do a little better than most runners, friend Harold.
He said with cheerfulness of superiority.
But I thought I'd give you a little surprise, seeing as how maybe you hadn't heard about my running. But don't let Uncle Fox get you into any contest. He'll make a wager and collect it out of your hide. You got to watch him that way.
What's Loki's game, anyway? I heard Heimdall suggesting he might be on the other side at the big fight.
That there child of fury gets a little mite hasty about Loki. Guess he'll turn up on the right side all right, but he's a queer one. Always up to something, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and he won't let anyone boss him. There's a lay about him, the Lokasenna, you know? I say to the gods and the sons of gods the things that whet my thoughts. By the wells of the world there is none with the might to make me do his will.
That agreed fairly well with the opinion Shay had formed of the enigmatic Uncle Fox. He would have liked to discuss the matter with Thialfi, but he found that while he could form such concepts as delayed adolescence, superego, and sadism readily enough, he could think of no words to express them. If he wanted to be a practicing psychologist in this world, he would have to invent a whole terminology for the science. He sneezed some more. He was catching cold. His nose clogged and his eyes ran. The temperature was going down, and an icy breeze had risen that did nothing to add to his happiness. They lunched without stopping, as they had on the previous day. As the puddles of the thaw began to develop crystals and the chariot wheels began to crunch, Shay blew on his mittens and slapped himself. Thialfi looked sympathetic.
Be really cold, friend Harold? This is barely freezing. A few years back we had a winter so cold that when you made a fire in the open, flames froze solid. I broke off some pieces, and for the rest of the winter, whenever we wanted a fire, I used one of them pieces to light it with. Would have come in mighty handy this morning. My Uncle Einar traded off some as amber.
It was told with so straight a countenance that Shay was not quite certain he was being kidded. In this world it might happen. The terrible afternoon finally waned. Skrymir was walking with his head up now, looking around him. The giant waved toward a black spot on the side of the hill. Grocky?
Whoops, I had the sound off. Hey, yous, there's a cave. What you say we camp in there, huh?
Thor looked around.
Sorry. It is not too dark for more of progress.
Loki spoke up.
Not a true powerful one. Yet I fear our warlock must soon freeze to an icebone. We should have to pack him in boughs, lest pieces chip off.
Oh, don't bite me. I can't stand it.
Perhaps he could. At least if they went on, he wouldn't have to manhandle that chest halfway up the hill. He was overruled, but after all did not have to carry the chest. When the chariot had been parked at the edge of a snowdrift, Skrymir took that bulky object under one arm and led the way up to the stony slope of the cave mouth.
Could you get us fire?
Sure thing, buddy.
Skrymir strode down to a clump of small trees, pulled up a couple by the roots, and breaking them across his knee, laid them for burning. Shay put his head into the cave. At first he was conscious of nothing but the rocky gloom. Then he sniffed. He hadn't been able to smell anything, not even Skrymir, for some hours, but now an odor pricked through the veil of his cold. A familiar odor. Chlorine gas. What?
Hey, you!
Roared Skrymir behind him. Shay jumped a foot.
Get the hell out of my way!
Shay got. Skrymir put his head down and whistled. At least he did what would have been called a whistle in a human being. From his lips, it sounded more like an air raid warning. A little man, about 3 feet tall, with a beard that made him look like a miniature Santa Claus, appeared at the mouth of the cave. He had a pointed hood, and the tail of his beard was tucked into his belt.
Hey, you! Let's have some fire. Make it snappy.
He pointed to the pile of logs and brush in front of the cave mouth.
Muspelspark, do you want to take the dwarf? I don't know who the dwarf is.
I can do it.
I
Yes.
could do it if you want.
Okay.
Sure, I can do
Yeah,
it.
great.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
and
Okay. Yes, sir.
He toddled over to the pile and produced a coppery-looking bar out of his jacket. Shay watched the process with interest, but just then Loki tucked an icicle down his back, and when Shay had extracted it, the fire was already burning with a hiss of damp wood. The dwarf spoke up in a little chirping voice.
You're not planning to camp here, are you?
Yeah! Now beat it!
Oh, but you must not.
Shut up! We camp where we damn please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Anything else, sir?
Oh, go on, beat it before I step on you.
The dwarf vanished into the cave. They got their belongings out and disposed themselves around the fire, which took a long time to grow. The setting sun broke through the clouds for a minute and smeared them with streaks of lurid vermilion. To Shay's imagination, the clouds took on the form of apocalyptic monsters. Far in the distance, he heard the cry of a wolf. Thialfi looked up suddenly, frowning.
What's that noise?
what noise?
Thor jumped up. He had been sitting with his back to the cave mouth and spun around.
Hey, clever one, our cave is already not untenanted.
He backed away slowly. From the depths of the cave there came a hiss, like that of a steam pipe leak, followed by a harsh, metallic cry.
The dragon!
A puff of yellow gas came from the cave, set them all coughing. A scrape of scales, the rattle of loose stones, and in the dark a pair of yellow eyes the size of dinner plates caught the reflection of the fire. A seal,
Whoa!
giant, and Thialfi shouted incoherently, grabbing for whatever might serve as a weapon.
Here, I can take care of him.
Cried Shay, forgetting his previous reasoning. He pulled out the revolver. As the great snake-like head came into view in the firelight, he aimed at one of the eyes and pulled the trigger. The hammer clicked harmlessly. He tried again and again. Click, click. The jaws came open with a reek of chlorine. Harold Shay stumbled back. There was a flash of movement past his head. The butt end of a young tree, wielded by Skrymir, swished down on the beast's head. The eyes rolled, the head half turned toward the giant. Thor leaped in with a roaring yell and let fly a right hook that would have demolished Joe Louis. There was a crunch of snapping bones. The fist sank right into the reptile's face. With a scream like that of a disemboweled horse, the head vanished into the cave. Thialfi helped Shay up.
Now maybe you can see Why, Scrimer would as lief not take chances with the Lord of the Goats. That there's dragon going to have him a toothache next spring, if there is any spring before the time.
The dwarf popped out again.
Hey, Scrimer,
Huh?
I tried to warn you that a fire would bring the dragon out of hibernation, but you wouldn't listen. Think you're smart, don't you? Yeah.
The vest-pocket Santa Claus capered in the cave mouth for an instant, thumbing his nose with both hands. He vanished as Scrimer picked up a stone to throw. The giant lumbered over to the cave and felt around inside.
Never catch the little top rug now. They have burrows all through these hills.
The evening meal was eaten in a silence made more pointed for Shay by the fact that he felt it was mostly directed at himself. He ought to have known better, he told himself bitterly. In fact, he ought to have known better than to embark on such an expedition at all. Adventure, romance, bosh! As for the dream girl whose fancied image he had once in a rash moment described to Walter Baker, those he had seen in this miserable dump were like lady wrestlers. If he could have used the formulas to return instantly, he would. But he could not. That was the point. The formulas didn't exist anymore as far as he was concerned. Nothing existed but the bleak, snowbound hillside. The nauseating giant, the two Asir and their servant, regarding him with aversion. There was nothing he could do. "Whoa, Shay, steady," he remarked to himself. "You're talking yourself into a state of melancholy which is, as Chalmers once remarked, of no philosophical or practical value. Too bad old Doc wasn't along to furnish a mature intellect in civilized company. The intelligent thing to do was not to bemoan the past, but to live in the present. He lacked the physical equipment to imitate Thor's forthright approach to problems, but he could at least come somewhere near Loki's sardonic and intelligent humor. And speaking of intelligence, had he not already decided to make use of it in discovering the laws of this world? Laws which these people were not fitted by their mental habit to deduce? He turned suddenly and asked,
Didn't that dwarf say the fire fetched the dragon out of hibernation?
Skrymir yawned and spoke.
Yeah? What about it, Snotty?
The fire's still here. What if he or another one comes back during the night?
Probably eat you and serve you right.
The niggling speaks sooth. It were best to move our camp.
The accent of contempt in the voice made Shay wince, but he went on.
We don't have to do that, do we, sir? It's freezing now and getting colder. If we take some of that snow and stuff it into the cave, it seems to me the dragon would hardly come out across it.
Soundly well said, Turnip Man. Now you and Thalf, ye shall do it. I perceive you are not altogether without your uses. Since there has been a certain gain in wit since you joined our party, who would have thought of stopping a dragon with snow?
Thor grunted. And that ends chapter 5.
Yes, it does. And I wanted hopefully that we could hear from Vidaf about Norton Street, what his plans were.
I had a very simple model for it. I was thinking